Welcome back. I'm Dr. Cheek and I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the differences between OCD and OCPD. Now, obsessive-compulsive disorder versus obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. Sound similar, have a similar name, but totally two different diagnoses and two different presenting symptoms and behaviors. So first, let's focus on the most common or the most well-known. And so first, let's start with OCD, or obsessive-compulsive disorder. It's a neuropsychological disorder that's characterized by both obsessions, and obsessions are thoughts, urges, images that we may have, and or compulsions, or primarily thoughts and compulsions. And the thoughts themselves present some level of distress or anxiety, and the compulsion, so the compulsion can either be an action or behavior or an actual mental act, and the aim of engaging in the compulsion is so that we either eliminate or reduce the anxiety or stop some dreaded or dreadful situation or event from happening. We have this intrusive or unwanted or undesired thought, urge, action urge, or image that pops up in our head that creates this level of anxiety or distress. And in order to reduce this, we engage in this compulsion. And this process, this loop of thoughts and actions can take hours. And what's significant about the compulsions is that typically is a ritual. And the ritual itself does not have to have any connection to the thoughts or the urges or the images. They may actually be completely counter to what the thoughts, image, or actions are. That could be something simple as needing to turn your key or press the start button on your car 3 times before you're actually willing to start the car, because you have this thought that if you start the car without pressing it 3 times before you start the car, then it may explode or something might happen. And the obsessions or the thoughts, the urges, or images tend to have a theme. Now, the theme typically revolves around feelings of guilt or responsibility, either for yourself or harming of yourself or someone else. It is some level of uncertainty, so that's where the anxiety comes in. So there is something happening that I'm uncertain about. It is thoughts, images, or urges that come up that may feel inappropriate, that may be related to sex or violence or anything of that nature that feels inappropriate for a given situation. And the last theme of the obsessions are order or symmetry. So things needing to be symmetrical, or having everything add up to 7, or having everything add up to 10. So some level of symmetry. So that's OCD. That's what OCD tend to present as, these obsessive thoughts. And in order to relieve the anxiety and the distress associated with the thoughts, we engage in these compulsive acts of behaviors. And the behaviors can be a ritualized actual behavior, or it can be a mental act. So maybe rehearsing a saying or something in your head as a mental act, or counting to a certain number. So all of those things are things that are associated with obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, on the other side of that, we have obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. And although they sound similar, they are completely different. Obsessive-compulsive personality disorder is not really marked by intrusive thoughts or unwanted thoughts or compulsion. It's this desire to maintain some level of control over life through rigid and inflexible adherence to rules or organization, or having orderliness. So someone who has obsessive personality disorder has this rigid adherence to doing things a certain way. And if they aren't able to get the task done in that specific manner or in that specific order, then they can feel so overwhelmed by not having that level of perfection, or not having that ability to complete this in this specific order, that the task itself will not get completed, because they get so overwhelmed by the sheer thought of not being able to do the task in a specific order. Now, there are aspects of OCPD that's related to wanting to do chores in a certain way, or needing to do cleaning in a certain way. There is the ability to do these things or engage in these activities in a time-consuming way, not in the most effective way, not even in the most cost-efficient way, but because they are committed to this level of rigidity around adhering to an order of doing something, the sheer idea of doing something out of order, or the sheer idea of trying to do a task in a more effective way instead of the way that they're used to doing it, causes this high higher level of anxiety and can keep them from engaging in the task. And an individual with OCPD may be likely to have a lot of unfinished tasks because maybe something in the task didn't go according to the plan or didn't go according to the order. Therefore, they stopped engaging in that task when they became overwhelmed. Individuals with OCPD also have a very inflexible way of engaging with others. They may be less likely to do things that are enjoyable, that are not considered productive because they see it as a waste of time. They put less value on engaging in those more social situations or making time for individuals. They put more value on being productive or being able to do things that has some value as it relates to work, as opposed to leisure activities or things that you simply do for fun. They, in most cases, will forego doing things that are considered fun because it feels like it's a waste of time. Someone with OCPD also may have a tendency to have very rigid or inflexible moral or ethical standards that they hold themselves to or they hold others to. There are a lot of things that are associated with OCPD that's more related to being able to have some level of perfection, being able to have some level of orderliness, being able to do things in a specific way each time in order to get the best results or what they deem to be the best results. And this type of individual, you may find that they are less likely to ask you to help out or less likely to ask you to do something for them because they feel that you may not do it the correct way, which in most cases is their way. And if any effort is made to try to do this activity in a different way, that creates a level of distress that is very uncomfortable for a person with OCPD. So they're less likely to ask for help because for them, there is a right way to wash dishes. There is a right way to mop the floor. There is a right way to vacuum. And if it's not done in that way, whether you can get the task done in another way or not, if it's not done their way, then that causes a great level of distress. Also, somebody with obsessive compulsive personality disorder can get so inflexible or rigid about an order or a list or a way to do something that if they have to make a decision that is outside of that order, that is outside of that process, or if they have to even prioritize items on a to-do list, they can get stuck in that process because the sheer act of trying to prioritize or make a decision without a clear set of guidelines to make that decision can cause an individual with obsessive compulsive personality disorder to do an ample amount of research in order to make a decision, to get stuck in the idea of trying to prioritize a list because everything or nothing feels like a priority. So it's the idea of prioritizing this list means that there is something I'm not going to get done, and not getting something done on the list causes me more distress than trying to figure out what needs to come first as opposed to what needs to come last, and I can actually forego doing. That's obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Now, there's also individuals who may experience or who may have OCD tendencies or actual OCD diagnoses that has experienced a significant trauma or also has a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder and OCD are commonly diagnosed together, or OCD is typically diagnosed later in life following a trauma in some aspects. And the reason for this is because when you've experienced a trauma and you have PTSD, there is a desire to avoid having to engage with or deal with unwanted thoughts, emotions, or reminders of past traumatic experiences. And also there could be some overlap with OCPD because there is a desire to control or be able to prevent certain negative outcomes from occurring again or to be victimized in any way again. So individuals who've experienced a trauma may engage in certain behaviors or create certain rigid patterns of engaging with individuals so that they have a greater level of predictability. Now, will someone who has experienced a trauma or who's diagnosed with PTSD always also have like OCD or OCPD? No, but they may have some tendency of wanting to engaging in compulsive behaviors or engaging in rituals in order to avoid certain thoughts or reminders of experience or memories. And they also may engage in some rigid or inflexible ways of engaging to have a sense of control over their lives, but they may not always meet criteria for a diagnosis of OCD or OCPD. And I want to also highlight that there are different levels of severity with OCD. There are different levels of severities with the intrusions and with the rituals that we engage in to alleviate the intrusions. And it's something that we need to take in consideration when we're thinking about if we truly have OCD or we just have OCD tendencies, because in everyday life, most of us have a way of doing something. If you have a morning routine, you can consider that a ritual, because for most of us, if our morning routine is interrupted in any way, we feel thrown off a little bit. But that doesn't mean you have OCD. We all have some tendency of wanting to create some pattern recognition in our lives, or some routine or ritualized behaviors that we engage in our lives, but does not mean that we have OCD or should be diagnosed with OCD. Simply because we like cleaning and cleanliness does not mean you have OCD. The things that I talked about today when it relates to OCD or OCPD defines individuals who have or meet criteria for those diagnoses. So what I hope you take from this video is this: there's a difference between obsessive compulsive disorder and obsessive compulsive personality disorders. They sound similar, but they're very different in their presentation and what they're actually addressing. One is a neuropsychological condition and another one is a personality disorder, and they both present very differently. And there are aspects of each one of those that could be present in someone who's experienced a trauma, because there's a significant co-occurrence of obsessive compulsive disorder in individuals who've experienced a trauma or who've been diagnosed with PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. These are all things to take into consideration. We may engage in ritualized behaviors. We may engage in routine behaviors. That does not necessarily mean we have OCD. We may be rigid about how we do certain things. That doesn't mean we have OCPD. It just depends on how those things present in your life and the level of distress or the level of dysfunction it may cause in your life that determines if it's something that's diagnosable, as opposed to something that just you experience on a day-to-day basis because that's how either you've learned how to be or that's just a part of who you are. As always, I hope you take something from today's video that was helpful and that was informative. Please feel free to jot down any thoughts, questions, or comments you have below. I thank you for taking the time to listen, and I'll be seeing you again very soon. Thank you.